All right, we're unmuted. All right.
We'll get this meeting in order. Roll call
I do roll call, Rose. I can. Randy Rice,
here.
Matt Olson.
Here.
Mandy Gray. Here. Jason Bernard.
I am here.
Katie, you're here to that. And Kelly Long, here. All present.
The agenda revisions and approval. Is there anything from last week's that?
I'll move to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approving the minutes of last week's meeting, April 24th, 2024. You wrote these, didn't you?
She did a great job.
Don't make me do it again.
I'll move to approve the minutes last week.
I'll second.
All in
Abstain.
favor?
Abstain.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Continuing discussion regarding general operation millage and other funding sources.
Can we get started?
Get right at it.
All right, so at the last meeting, we had quite a lengthy conversation about kind of, where things are at, maybe where things are going. We talked about a lot of stuff that was in the packet. We did try to provide some additional information in the packet for this week. So you do see a lot more information in there, the L4028s from the Equalization Department. We also provided the bulletin that the State Tax Commission puts out for the equalization directors, which helps them determine how they're coming up with the rollbacks and those sorts of things, just so you have that information. Also in here, sorry, there's a lot of pages. All right, so also in here are the various years for the estimated dollars for the different jurisdictions. So within the county, so the townships is what I'm referring to. Anywhere you see Frankfort, as a reminder, Frankfort's not part of this. The cities are on their own. And so if you ever see Frankfort involved, just know that they're not part of this, and neither are the villages. So what we're here focusing on is the county and the townships specifically. And then on the last couple of pages are pie charts that Brienne had put together from the equalization director, which kind of shows the breakout of all the different millages that the county has on the tax bill every year. So you'll see on here, there's the not only is there our normal general operating, there's road improvements, animal control, jail, the Maples, Commission on Aging, school and youth resource, ambulance, conservation district, the medicals, bond as well, narcotics, and veterans. So the breakout is there just to help kind of show you guys where the funding is going as of now. So this was just more food for thought, honestly. I know last time the conversation really was leading down the one path of potentially just addressing the timeline piece of things and not touching the millage piece of things. So I guess we can continue on those conversations about the two paths kind of going forward. How I envision it is we really have two situations here. We have a situation of the general operating that was put in place in 1982 was an indefinite status. So it's never been reset. It's just indefinite. And then we also have this piece of the rollback and how much is rolled back throughout the years. In my head, there's kind of two pieces we need to address. We need to look at that indefinite piece and maybe put a timeline on it or maybe not. And then there's the rollback piece too that maybe needs to be looked at. So I'll let you guys now fill in.
Well, I still feel like like last week where, I think we need to deal with the word indefinite and deal with the ability to go to the our voters when necessary. But as far as adjusting any type of levy, I don't think it's necessary. I think we would, I mean, that's just my opinion at the moment, or it has been anyway. So that's kind of where I am.
I'm intending to agree with Jason. I've been, through all the stuff that we've discussed and I've been to a couple training sessions that's discussed Headley rollback.
Mhm.
And with all the factors that are involved right now, I mean, we have all these factors. We have taxable value that's increasing at the 5% rate, overall 9% with the uncapping that has occurred. The Headley rollback's only going back 1.1% or 1.01%, excuse me. The rate of inflation right now is still hovering, what, at 3.5%? We have the hugest factor coming up with the presidential election in November. I don't know what's going to happen with that. Is inflation going to go skyrocket again? Is it going to plummet? I mean, we don't know what those factors are. And of course, the final factors are all these millages that are coming to date in August and November. They're not just renewals, they're renewals with increases. So I'm more inclined to go with Jason. Maybe we need to take care of the indefinite, come back 2 years from now and discuss it and educate the people on the millages that are out there right now to see if there's a possibility to get the ones that we need to get passed, and move forward that way. If we keep adding more to the people, it's not going to happen this year.
I also agree. I mean, we're just kind of at this point where ballot fatigue is a real thing, especially this year. And I don't want to do that to the community. I mean,
And the fund balance isn't struggling at the moment,
No,
no,
right? Like,
We don't have
that to mean it won't, but it's not currently. And
we can make it work for a little bit longer. But at least that indefinite piece, because what that does, right now, it's taken the last 42 years to get the board to really get this far in the process of even discussing it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so that's a huge milestone in itself. We're actually discussing it. So what I see with fixing the indefinite piece, now you're securing that conversation coming back up again, because it has to now. So it's not another 42 years. And then it's the county is cut down to bare minimum services and, it's at least it puts a timeline on things so that we can plan for the discussion. We can gear up for the discussion. We can, really figure out where we want to be as a county. That puts a timeline on things, which I think is necessary. So we're not 42 years down the road
Mhm.
trying to talk about this again.
gives you the option for sure.
I also agree. I don't know how that would look ballot wise. Would we just, like, proposal wise, would we just write that as removing the indefinite, but then leave the millage rate and state the millage rate in the proposal that it's
Mhm.
staying?
Yeah, so the ballot language that I've read for other communities who have done this, the ballot language would read in the sense of the millage would stay at the whatever rate. And so, for instance, if say we determine the 2024 rate or the 2023 rate, the millage language would read that the levy stays at the 2023 rate of blah, but that then it expires in this date.
And then we would put the term that
Yeah.
we want to next address it.
Correct.
Now, that doesn't necessarily set an artificial new cap for the future, correct?
Nope.
Right. That's I
The
just. I don't wanna be
5.29
empty in
is
future
always the
That is the-
original.
That is the ceiling and that's.
Correct.
That stays.
So the 5.29 always will stay the ceiling. By fixing the indefinite piece, the millage language would read that it's staying at a current rate for these whatever years. And then when we approach those whatever years, and we're talking about this again, we're back to the same situation of, okay, do we roll back to 5.29?
Right.
Do we roll back to 5? Do we stay at 3 point whatever? We have these same conversations of how high do you go if you do go, and then what's your new timeline? Is it going to be every 2 years? Is it every 5 years? Or is it every 10 or so on? You'd have that opportunity to have those
More
conversations.
meetings and
again.
more
And the
public
Headley will still
comment.
be
more
involved in that
input.
rate, right?
Yep, so the
Yep.
rollback happens, that's factored in every year, no matter what. That's the law.
So the max,
that's
so it'd be like a
considered.
maximum is this until this date
Mhm.
with the Headley
Mhm.
involved in it.
But like I put it out last week, it always goes back to the voters. So,
Yeah, the
Yeah.
voters always
Yeah.
get to make the.
I mean, if
Just wanted
it
to-
fails,
yeah.
then we go back, then we stay indefinite.
yeah.
Yeah.
We
and so
haven't
that's
lost
the other-
anything. We're
That's the
just
other thing to keep in mind.
try
So if
again.
we go to the voters, say in November, and say, Headley or the general operating at these original 2023 values. But for 2 years, and the community says, yeah, we don't care. Nope, not happening. We fall back on where we're at right
Mhm.
now,
Right.
the indefinite piece with the 3 point whatever. So we're not pigeonholing ourselves into getting rid of all of our
Yep.
money.
exactly.
So.
I think it's the smartest way to go.
So, if that's how this board is feeling, you would make formal recommendations. We take a motion to make formal recommendation to the Board of Commissioners to move forward with XYZ at this election. Who wants to make that motion? If that's what you're ready to do.
I'll make that motion.
Are we ready to?
Yeah,
Well,
can I,
we can go to discussion.
Yeah.
We can go to discussion as soon as the motion is made. I mean,
Correct.
So I'll make that motion.
You want me to actually make one up?
Sure.
yeah, we'd have, if we need some language for this one.
Yeah.
Well,
This
I
is
mean,
multifaceted
so-
here.
I don't think we're gonna get the exact language, but the idea behind it anyway.
The motion is we're making a recommendation.
Yes,
A
right,
motion
you're
to
making
make
a
a recommendation to
recommendation.
the Board of Commissioners to set a definitive timeline for,
How many years?
that's the,
How
Wanna
many
do
years are you
two?
I think that, I'm
comfortable?
not sure we're ready for, we've got to
Yeah.
figure out timeline. I'm not sure.
I'm gonna say, I mean, two is fine. Two, I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean,
Whatever you do, I'd recommend it even,
Yeah, you're
because in the
guaranteed
even
election.
years, we
Yep.
don't have to pay for election.
Elections, right?
If we hold a special election,
2
and then
years.
it's 9-day early voting, I mean, you're looking at a lot of money to hold an election these days.
One of the.
Yes.
Where, one of the wonderings that I have regarding, I know we had talked, and I apologize, I know I missed the last meeting, if
You're
this
okay.
was discussed, I don't mean to repeat, but the notion of the smaller millages and the long tax bill that we have, and I know there's some real positives to that.
Yep.
As those millages, I know that we would be reticent to, promise not to levy them and then raise tax.
Mhm.
That's a trust issue.
Yeah,
But as those millages potentially could fall off, does that leave the county with the ability to potentially let the millage fall off, but then like at a zero increase, raise the general operating? That would not, correct? Because we would be
Correct.
on a 2-year timeline.
yeah,
And
Right.
would that be, I raise that as if that would be important or if that's something that the ship has sailed on.
yeah, I guess I don't understand your question.
So, we've done this kind of, this
piecemeal
sounds
approach.
pejorative. Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say nickel and dime, but this piecemeal approach to budgeting for
Right.
so many years.
Mhm.
And, and some of them I make a lot of sense. Some of them to me make less sense, like the 0.1 mils for, a TNT officer.
Right.
Whereas
I'd
that's
love to see TNT
just be
school
part-
resource be pulled into the general ledger, because it's all part of the sheriff's office.
Correct,
So why can't we pull that in there? I'd love to see the veterans get pulled in as well.
exactly. Like
Well-
there's ones that just
Makes
just from logic, from my perspective.
Yep.
Don't really make sense to be a special levy.
Yeah.
Right.
And just, it'd be nice if we could structure this in such a way so that you don't have to rely on trust. Like we promise not to levy, as opposed to, we're gonna let it fall off, but then so that we don't have a budget hole that we are able to then.
Yeah, so
Make up.
Right.
we wouldn't even be, we
Yeah.
wouldn't even be dealing with that because we're not touching we're not touching any levies, or wouldn't be, we're recommending to anyway. If something like that were to come up in the future, would be a conversation for the future. For 2 years down the road, if this ends up going on a ballot and is passed, it would be before that election that we would discuss. Maybe we
Right.
should let some of these fall off and have a ballot initiative or question for that. But until then, everything stays.
Yeah,
The
so,
reason
Right.
I bring it up is I think it speaks to the timeline that we set, right?
yeah,
Like,
so
we
I
do
have the
this-
dates here.
Yeah,
So as far as the dates go, in 2026, the animal control and TNT drug enforcement are up and the Maples are up. So those three in 2026,
so it would fall off at the end of fiscal 2026.
correct.
So if we
So
were to
if you
do
did
a
a general
millage
operating,
in
you could roll
2026, which is
2 years.
then
could
you
roll
can
all
feel
those in
feasibly
potentially.
do
Right.
that.
Yep.
Right. And we
That's-
could discuss bundling in that TNT and whatever else we think at that
Again, I'm
time.
not trying to
Yeah.
say that's what should happen. I just
Right.
want the ability to
The
have a
timeline makes
conversation.
sense. The
Right.
timeline makes sense, the
Yep.
26th. So in 28, you're gonna have the SRO in the jail.
Mhm.
And then the other two that we're addressing this year are Commission on Aging and EMS. So
So a 2-year would allow
a
for that.
2-year would make sense because then you're at prime time. If you're going to consider bundling, that really is the year, because you could bring those ones in naturally without having to promise that, oh, we're not gonna levy these. Well, there'd be no opportunity to levy because they're also falling off in that 2026 timeline. So that does make sense. The 28 timeline for SRO and jail, humbly as the administrator, I will not recommend putting the jail in the general fund. Just from a practice standpoint, from our staffing, I don't want it in the general fund. So that one I would always recommend to stay out. But it would make sense to put the SRO in with all the other police operations, if that's where we're headed. Obviously, could also be talk at that time of a public safety millage and just bundling all public safety into one. And, there's obviously that conversation that could happen at that time as well.
And I just think, I feel like our role is to make sure that the commissioners are equipped to have the conversation.
Yeah.
Right? That's where my head's at. I don't.
Right.
Yeah, so I think I'll stick with the 2 years though. If that
Yep.
works, it works.
I would
Yeah.
agree.
You're making a motion to recommend to the Board of Commissioners to place on the November or August ballot. Technically, there's time for August because it's a May 14th timeline. Go to the clerk and our next meeting is the 14th.
But there's
Technically-
attorneys and everything involved too.
That feels tight.
Say November,
I mean,
November.
our attorney turns around language pretty quick, but it's up to you
And
guys.
there's no cost for
Sometimes
the
ours
August
doesn't.
5th
I don't know.
primary.
I don't know.
Correct. August, November it's free in a
Yeah,
sense.
no
There's
additional cost.
There's no
Yep.
additional cost
We
for
don't want
August or November.
Do we have to indicate which election? Can we leave that up to the commissioners?
You could.
Yeah.
In August or November
Yeah.
of
Right.
2024.
That's what I would suggest.
I
And then
don't-
if
I
they
wouldn't
don't,
wanna artificially
can't
rush
get it, yeah, because
And then,
that is
okay,
pretty
so the
tight.
recommendation to request to the Board of Commissioners for the August or November ballot, the consideration of renewing the general operating with a 2-year timeline. That makes sense? That's
Yeah.
right.
Like that.
So,
And how
'cause
do
then
we,
when I
how do we say
renew,
that we want to remove the indefinite clause? You were just saying it by
I
saying the
think
2-year
renewing
timeline,
with a
really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
the 2-year timeline. Because a
says
renewal
it
is
itself.
based on
Yep.
what we have.
Okay.
And then the 2-year timeline.
Yeah, that'll work.
Makes sense.
Does that make sense to everybody? That's what Jason said.
I'll second that.
2024, that those ones drop off, have we revoted?
Yeah, so Commission on Aging and EMS, that is this year.
This year.
Okay.
Commission on Aging, we're looking at, I think we said August and maybe November, and EMS will definitely be in November.
So those millages are not passed, to say,
These two, no, these are on the docket for this year.
okay,
EMS and Commission on Aging.
and then the other ones,
Those are coming up. So these
Right.
ones are not on the docket. They're in process. The ACO, TNT, SRO, those are all just, we're midterm. And those expire in 26 and 28. The jail is on the docket this year.
Okay.
And I'm recommending a 4-year millage for that.
Sure.
To expire in 28, but
Okay.
that one is on the docket for this year, the jail.
now if the voters on any one of them decide not to renew it or approve increase, but it's under the general fund, then where does that money,
They-
that would technically go to that? It's not there anymore, but there's that amount that people paid. It's that extra part is in the pot now.
No,
No.
that's not how it
It
works.
just goes away.
If
Goes
those
over.
millages do
No.
not pass, the money is gone and those services go away, period.
No levy.
But that's it, but
There's
that's.
no extra in the wings for
Right, but
ACO.
then what about the?
Well, the jail can't go away. It's
Right,
mandated, so.
Sales mandated.
I mean,
Yeah.
it would become like, can the general fund pick it up? Which the answer would probably be
No.
no,
Well,
I
that's,
imagine.
but if we have a recommendation to the board to roll back the Headley Amendment to the full amount, then some of those are gonna go in that,
Correct.
but now if those fall off.
Yeah.
We're still getting the 5 mills.
Yeah, so,
If there's 1 mill there, to say.
Sure.
And it drops off. Well, now there's still 5 mills coming into the county. Even though that service isn't available,
no,
if the voters decide.
at that point, the county would bundle these into the general fund. So if the
Best we could.
ACO, if the animal control and TNT fall off and we're not levying them, however, we do have increased funds coming into the general fund, we would take those on into the general fund. But if there was no increase in the general fund and these millages failed per se, and there's no money coming in, animal control is going away. It's not a mandated service, going away. Drug enforcement's going away. It's not a mandated service, going away. SRO, not mandated unless we get grant funding from the state, which we can apply for because there is grant funding.
Right.
It's going away. The jail, most of the jail is going to go away. Because the
Right.
only thing I'm mandated to have is a sheriff, an under sheriff, and a holding cell. So if we can't pay for the jail's closing.
Right.
But then we have to pay our neighboring counties to house our
Sure.
inmates. There's still a cost,
Of course,
but it may be less.
right. Okay,
But then I'm gonna lay off 16 people
sure.
in the process.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm just still confused on the money amount.
Yeah.
If we increase it to 5 mils, if we
Uh-huh.
recommend it. And then we take one of those mills and roll it in there. So it effectively was a 4 mil increase for the government, for the
Mhm.
county.
Mm-hmm.
But the taxpayer is still paying 5 mils.
Motion that we have right now on the table is to not increase the.
Yeah, and,
Right, I
and
know.
this conversation would be 2 years down the
So,
road.
here, right, pull these. Okay, so now I got the numbers.
I see what you're, okay, I'm following you. I
Yep,
was thinking.
now I got the numbers.
I don't think there's, money just laying around anywhere. I'm just
Right.
was
Yeah,
trying to
so.
figure that out.
Yeah,
Okay,
for
so hypothetically, we take to the voters and we say, we want to go up to 5.29. The voters say, yep, let's do it. So if we come up to 5.29, we've now increased the levy by 2 mils. And so with that 2 mils, we could then bundle in others. Based on this list here, we could bundle in TNT, we can bundle in school resource officer,
Animal control.
we can bundle in animal control, absolutely.
And
And we could almost probably bundle in the Maples operating. Bonds are separate,
Sure,
they'll
of
stay
course,
separate.
right,
Those could all be bundled in.
Mhm.
with essentially.
And
keeping
then
it
it'd just
flat.
be one millage and it'd keep things flat. Those could be bundled in.
And when those other millages come up for renewal, you wouldn't even do that then.
Correct. They just
Mhm.
fall off
It
your
just,
tax
we
bill.
wouldn't.
Just be gone.
Mhm.
That's where, like, rather than, trying to do this all in one fell swoop to say, let's
Right,
go up 2 mils, let's try to pull all these back and like do a big,
sure.
kind of. I mean, there's some logic to it. I mean, from a financial perspective, I'll
Sure.
be the first person to say, like, I think there is some financial logic to that. But we also want to make sure that we're giving voice and,
Mhm.
would the commission even consider that?
Right.
This is allowing for kind of, basically, it seems like we're stretching out the timeline to discuss that
Mhm.
and allowing for it to happen, not at all completely, but either way be over time.
Exactly.
Right.
And maybe time will be different in the community and in our society and our economy,
Mhm.
where the community is more open to the discussion.
Right.
Right.
Allows for the option,
Correct. Yep.
but it doesn't force the issue.
The option is the big, is the ticket there. I mean,
There'll
Without
always be
this, there
some
is
that
no-
never fall off.
Right.
I mean, EMS, that is an enterprise fund. They're a business. Those will never come into the general fund because that is its own enterprise fund. You don't bring those into your general fund.
Right.
So if this county always wants to have EMS, we're gonna have to vote on it every so many years and it's always gonna be a standalone business fund essentially.
Mhm.
So that one's always gonna stay out separately. The bond will stay out separately for reasons, but that one's gonna go away here in a couple of years anyways, when the bond's paid off. So that was
It's a separate debt.
The
reserve
separate
fund,
debt.
Yeah. Mhm.
the veterans now is a levy. And the veterans levy actually does not go to the voters. In statute, the county has the right to levy up to a certain amount for veterans. So to put that into the general fund doesn't totally make sense because it's a non-voted levy. The county has that authority to levy those dollars for the veterans. Now, if the community thinks we're not levying enough, because we are not levying the cap,
Right.
the community can tell us that and we could up that levy more. But all of the ones related to the sheriff's office could fall off, animal control could fall off. Commission on Aging is typically always a separate levy. I've never seen it in a general fund, so that one most likely would always be separate. The jail is the only one that's really questionable on whether or not you put it into your general fund. But the jail is such a liability as it stands. I don't want to put it into the general fund. It's too much of a liability. As maybe some of you know, so counties are required to, when they take on an inmate, they pay for everything. So budgeting for a jail every year is actually quite difficult because as soon as someone steps foot into that jail, federal law says all of their medical benefits, any benefit they have, go away. They now become a warden of the county. We have to pay for everything out of our pockets, medical, dental, vision, mental health, food, everything. We're required to by federal law to do that. And so that's just a gamble every year. Because we could have, 2 years ago, we had 2 inmates birth children. Do you know how expensive it is to birth a child these days? we had to pay that bill. And so there's just so much liability when it comes to the jail. It's safer to keep it separate because of that reason. Now, they are working in Lansing to help bridge that gap. We're pushing Lansing to ask for an exception to the Medicaid law. And what that would do is it would allow the county to then, that 3 months before they are released, they could go back onto their private insurance. So it'd give us a gap of less paying, but while they're in our jails, we have to foot the full bill for all things, period.
Can you say a little bit more about, so when you keep it outside as a separate levy? If, let's say, we had a really bad year, right,
Mhm.
and just all the like expenses went nuts. And you reach the end of your millage dollars. Then what happens?
We have to supplement with the general fund. To-
So
to-
you would still have to go into the general fund?
We still would have to supplement to, break even,
Okay,
but keeping it out of the general fund for a semantics of operations is the best route to go.
okay.
So, so elected official dynamic is a real thing. And so, by law, an elected official, once the Board of Commissioners grants them a budget, we cannot tell them how to spend it. It is up to that elected official to spend their funds how they believe necessary. I cannot question it. And so if I put that into the general fund and their bottom line goes from 2.5 million to 8.5 million, that's the number that someone's gonna see. And they're gonna think, man, we're good. We got 8.5 million, they'll figure it out.
So you could end up trying to balance other expenses for sheriff's department on the back of the jail,
Correct,
which could end up causing leakage. I see.
correct.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so that's all elected officials. It's not just the sheriff.
No.
Technically, that's how the statute's written. And so the only opportunity for the Board of Commissioners to say no is when they run out of money.
Right.
And so there's, you can't do a lot of questioning. County government is very weird in Michigan and how it's made up. Cities are very different. Counties are very different in the sense of you have this elected official, Board of Commissioner, appointed official dynamic. And we have these three-way relationships in how we manage our money. And that's just what we're sold to by the Constitution, and that's the hand we're dealt.
Mhm.
So we started a motion to just indefinite.
Mhm.
And we had
And I
support.
seconded it.
And that's just for the indefinite course.
That's to
Correct.
fix the indefinite.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carried.
Does anyone want to talk further about a levy? Or is that just that we're done?
I'm done.
Not now, I don't.
To bring in other income to the county, why couldn't we do like a 0.5% sales tax? Because then all the visitors come by, and when they buy something, goes into our coffers, as opposed to the taxpayer footing all the bill for.
So you're
You
talking.
have a smile on your face.
So you're talking, so. Sales tax is a state issue. And so right now, there's a lot of conversation in Lansing talking about revenue sharing. And revenue sharing is that sales tax piece. And so there's a model in Lansing regarding revenue sharing, and townships, counties, cities. We all get these different amounts of funding for revenue sharing. Over the years, the state has cut back on revenue sharing and stopped sharing so much with the locals. So right now, there's 3 ideas in Lansing, and so we're waiting for the Senate, the House, and the governor to agree.
Sure.
Phenomenal. About what we're gonna do. So right now, revenue sharing could increase, but we don't know by how much, and it may not, because Lansing doesn't always agree on things with the 3 of each others. And so, that's where the sales tax piece comes in, is that revenue sharing piece, and that affects all of us. From a county, city, village, those sorts of things. A bed tax. Now, there's some tourist communities that do a bed tax. And so like if you go stay in Lansing or what have you, you'll see like a tourist tax or a bed tax on like your hotel bills.
Yep.
That is something that the county could pursue as a millage to the community. Yes.
I heard that.
We'd work with the Visitors Bureau and the Chamber, and that's.
We have a version of that already with TC Tourism, as I understand it. Like there already is, that's what funds TC Tourism, and Benzie now is.
We're now
part of TC
part of
Tourism.
that, and so
But that,
Our people are not being levied for it.
right,
But we're part of TC Tourism now, and so the whole idea of partnering with them is obviously we get some of their money comes to Benzie, and you'll see that. I mean, you
Right.
see more advertising and those sorts of things.
Yep.
The county itself, like other cities and stuff, could go to the community and say, we want to do this, or whatever.
yeah, have an additional, yeah.
Mhm. And that is possible. We just haven't explored that at the county level at all. Art has brought it up a couple of times over the years, is my understanding. We just haven't explored that piece of it.
I don't disagree, Randy, that makes sense. I mean, that's our primary, essentially our primary driver
Right.
right now, so using that primary economic driver to the benefit of the residents is logical.
Because at one meeting I attended, they were talking about the $3 surcharge on their cell phones for 911.
Hmm.
Well, it was brought up that people traveling through this area that have to use 911 service, they're not,
They're not paying.
$3 is not on their bill for us.
And that's
But they're accessing our resources
Correct.
that we have to pay for.
Same with police and fire and all your local fires. Yes, you're absolutely right. That $3 surcharge, wherever your residence is on your bill.
Yeah.
That's the surcharge. Your surcharge goes to that community. So if you're in Benzie or Grand Traverse or what have you, my $3 comes here, but then other people's goes to Grand Traverse. Some people goes to Manistee. I mean, it's just a matter of where you're at. Yes, I mean, that's absolutely right. And so maybe that's conversations that we need to have at the county level is there some sort of tourism bed tax? Whatchamacallit?
No, but by that logic too, I think what we're talking about, when you look at rates of property tax here compared to other places that are, remember, our property taxes are paid to a large degree by a lot of seasonal and vacation homes and so on, and along those lines.
Right.
So I mean, our residents do proportionally, probably compared to a place that is not as dependent on tourism, right?
Mhm.
Pay, less of the total share of property taxes because it's offset by people who own
Right.
partially, all the real estate. Now, again, that's, not everyone will agree with that, but I think that's a truth too. So I mean, that's why I think having some of these conversations around
Mhm.
our tax levies and our millages. I hope the commission, when they go to explore this, do some comparables, take
Yeah.
a look and see.
There's a balance you have to strike. I
Right.
mean,
I've seen, again, just from, just my own experience, which is limited, but I mean, there's millage rates for schools, that are much higher in
Mhm.
other parts of the state.
oh, yeah.
Just the example, when we were going for our millage in Benzie, MESIC was going for a millage. And I mean, they were trying to levy 4 mills to make a third of what a half mill would have done for us.
Yeah.
And so again, like
Property values.
property values and having those things makes a difference.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and you have to keep in mind, whatever you charge, if there is a trickle down effect, Crystal Mountain is already our highest taxpayer and our highest taxable value and our highest.
Right.
You add another, their increase, it's gonna be higher to stay there. It
Mhm.
already is astronomical.
Right.
And there is a trickle down effect. So
Right.
we have to strike that balance of what's not too high that is gonna deter people from staying in Benzie.
Mhm.
What is that balance?
Right. And it has an effect on our residents too.
Yeah.
obviously.
The
So,
less people that stay here, the less jobs that are needed and yeah. So it's a matter of striking that balance and I don't think that's out of the question to talk about. I mean. We have a very small population, but we support a huge population of tourists. Maybe they can help out a little.
Yep.
Makes sense.
so we fulfilled our duty.
Filled your duty. Next meeting's canceled.
Public comment?
Public comment.
Yeah, any, public comment?
Thank you.
I tried. But
Sure, please. Thank you.
And I have one just like this. I love the purple. It's my favorite. It was a gift. Did you get the agave one? They had, it's like this tone, but it's teal. Ooh.
So the night before the first meeting is the first time I'd ever heard of Headley. So I was way behind the curve. And I spent the next several days just catching up, trying to figure out what in the world it is. And I learned it is horribly designed, horribly flawed, convoluted, but it is understandable ultimately. Anyway, that said, I've taken data from Katie and Brianne, and also my neighbor, who is Joe Weishar. He's a retired foreign engineer, very bright guy. So we've both looked at things independently, and we've basically come to the same conclusion. So what I prepared here for you, it's basically 3 groups of data. The first group on the left is all related to taxable value. The next group is related to admin revenue. And then the final group is US inflation rates. And when you look at things like this, it's really important to not only look at and think about millages and or percentages, but it's also important to look at and think about absolute dollars, because one can be very misleading. So the bottom line here for the numbers that I'm looking at, which are Katie's numbers just reformatted, is that if you start in 2017 and you look at the change in taxable value of the county, that it changed by $433 million. And that's a 36% increase in taxable value of the county. Then when you look at the admin revenue, the next group over, and these are the highlighted numbers, lightly highlighted. The admin changed from 4.1 million in 2017 to 5.48 million in 2023. And that's a 31% change. So it's less than the taxable value change, and that's because of Headley.
Right.
And then the final group, if you look at the change in the CPI, that changed 25%. So what I draw from this is, given a status quo situation with expenditure requirements for the county, that the 31% should be sufficient to keep up with the 25% CPI. So that's really the bottom line. You know, it's interesting to see the difference between the 36% taxable value versus the 31% admin. But then again, there's a big gap between that and the CPI. So for what it's worth then, my suggestion to you is right on par with what you guys are thinking. Because Headley really is dangerous. The way that it works, by giving the full share to education and penalizing everybody else, in essence, making them make up the difference, is if you carry it to infinity, that design with no resets or no ability to reset, at infinity, 100% of the budget ends up in education and 0 ends up for administration. That can't work. So I suggest eliminating the infinity, going to a 2-year, maybe 4, but 2 is better, and run with it. And I prefer the transparency, by the way, of the line items. I understand the convenience of bundling, but I still like the accountability and transparency. And thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
No, that doesn't, 20.
Correct.
Correct. But it's an average.
It's an average.
It's an average. Yeah.
Julie Beerworth, Benzonia County, just a tiny little thing. When you were talking about whether to try it for the August or November ballot, I think people's heads, hearts, emotions are going to be crazy in November. I think you'll get more of a focused vote if you can achieve the August.
Thank you.
Good point.
It's tight, but there is time. so.
Let the commissioners make that decision.
Anybody else? A motion to adjournment.
So moved.
Support?
All in favor?
I.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.